Look at our proposition here. We've gone from it will either rain or snow tomorrow, or else it will not rain or snow tomorrow, to either R or S or not R or S. So much cleaner, right? And yet we still have those words either, or, and, not. Now, why would I be concerned with those little words? I mean, they're small, they're pretty consistent. It seems like they would do a good enough job. Am I just getting symbolization happy? Let's consider a different proposition from one of my favorite old movies, Kindergarten Cop. It's not a tumor. This proposition is made out of a basic proposition and a connective. The basic proposition being it is a tumor, the connective being not. We'll symbolize that basic proposition with a T. So T symbolizes it is a tumor, and we can write something like not T, and that seems like it functions pretty well, right? One important thing when we're figuring out how we're going to symbolize these things is that we want to be consistent, right? We want to make sure that we're using the same thing, so so the propositions don't get all cluttered up there, so we don't get confused about exactly what it is that we mean. And this word not could serve that function, right? We could just make sure that we use the word not every time we're talking about a negation. But there's the other important thing, is to remember that we're talking about a connective. We're not just talking about the word not. Remember, a negation attaches to a proposition. Not the sentence itself, but the proposition, the claim that's being expressed by that sentence. We call the proposition that it attaches to the negand, and we say that the negation is true if and only if the negand is false. And that is what we're symbolizing here with that word not. Oftentimes we use that word not to express this connective, this negation connective. But remember that the two aren't identical. Instead of using a not, I could use some other word, right? I could say, there's no way that it's a tumor. And notice I haven't used the word not there, and yet I've expressed the same kind of thing, the same proposition, which is that basic proposition, it is a tumor, and that connective, that negation connective, so that this new proposition is true if and only if that basic proposition is false. Or I could use that word not and not be expressing a negation. So I might be speaking sarcastically. I might say something like, it's not like I have a tumor or anything. And I'm actually expressing the opposite of what it typically expresses. Now I'm expressing the fact that I do have a tumor. This is all a lot funnier when Arnold Schwarzenegger says it in his Austrian accent, so maybe I should have picked a different proposition. In any case, in our language of PL, we could have used the word not, but we're not going to. The reason being, we don't want to confuse it with the fact that we're symbolizing a negation and not just the word not. Instead, we're going to represent this negation with a neg, with this little symbol that I'm going to put on the screen there. And remember, this is a one-place connective, so you would have something to the right of it, and it would be negating that thing. Now, I know I said we are not going to be using the word not, but typically when you speak, when you're saying these things, you're going to be using the word not, because saying, like, for example, neg P sounds weird. So you're going to say not P, but when you're writing it, you're going to use that little symbol. The word neg is just the name of that symbol. It's kind of like in English, the letter D, right? The name of that letter is D, but the sound that it makes is a D, right? The way you pronounce it is D, not D. The same thing here. The name of this symbol is neg, but you could say the way you pronounce it is not. I don't know. Also, if you're taking a different course alongside with this, they may use a different negation symbol. A lot of times they use the tilde, the little squiggle, like it looks like a little bit of toothpaste. So that is a negation. Now let's go into a conjunction. Consider the proposition, I like pie and you like quiche. Remember, this is a two-place connective. It connects to two different propositions, and it's true if and only if both conjuncts, both propositions that it connects to, are also true, and it's false if and only if at least one, possibly both of those conjuncts are false. So in our example here, this is true if and only if I like pie and also you like quiche. If I don't like pie or you don't like quiche, or I don't like pie and you don't like quiche, then in any of those three situations, this whole new conjunction is false. We are going to symbolize this connective using what we'll call a caret. By the way, it's spelled C-A-R-E-T, not like the carrot you eat. And it's that little triangle without the base. Also, it's a little bit different than the symbol on top of the 6 key on your keyboard. You know, that little thing that you put in there to say, hey, I'm inputting something up top here, right? And we'll slip this symbol in between the two conjuncts. So, for example, we might say P and Q, where P is I like pie and Q is you like quiche. And we'll also put a parentheses around this to keep straight exactly what is being connected. Logical formulas can get pretty long and confusing, and it's not always the case that it's just one sentence letter that's in that first or second place of the connective. What does all that mean? Don't worry, you'll see that very soon here. Like in math, sometimes people will drop these parentheses when it's just not necessary. So for example, if I only say P and Q, I don't have anything else like surrounding those things, I might not need to put the parentheses there. I don't know that Smith ever drops the parentheses in this book. So you may not need to know that, but just know that, when you're in a different course or maybe you see it somewhere else, that you might see it without the parentheses. In the last video, by the way, I also asked you to do the exercise after these two sections. Typically, I do the teaching and then the next video I have the exercise, but this exercise is pretty mellow, so let's get into it. We have the following glossary. A stands for Aristotle was a philosopher, B stands for paper burns, and F stands for fire is hot. Now, using this glossary, we're asked to take sentences from our new language of PL and translate them into English. And we'll start with number 1. So again, you would pronounce this as not A, not neg A, right? I know that little symbol, the name of that symbol is neg, but we'll just say not A. It sounds a lot better. So A stands for Aristotle was a philosopher. This not A is something like Aristotle was not a philosopher, or maybe something like it is not the case that Aristotle was a philosopher, or it is false that Aristotle was a philosopher. Any of those things are fine. Number 2, we have those parentheses, A and then the caret symbol, and B. I guess I didn't say this before. We're going to pronounce that caret symbol as and. So A and B. And translating that into English, we get something like Aristotle was a philosopher and paper burns. Or maybe something like it is true that Aristotle was a philosopher and paper burns. Number 3, things get a little bit more confusing here. We have the parentheses A and not B. So remember that and is a two-place connective. The proposition on the left side here we have is A. That one's kind of simple because it's a sentence letter by itself. But looking over here on the right side of that caret, we see that there is the not sign directly to the right there. So obviously a not is not by itself a proposition. Not B is the proposition. So that is in the second place. You can almost look at these things as like you have blanks on either sides of the symbol and you fill those in with your different propositions. So looking at this, we get something like Aristotle was a philosopher and it's not the case that paper burns, or Aristotle was a philosopher and paper doesn't burn, or something like that. Number 4, we get the parentheses not F and not B. That's something like fire is not hot and paper does not burn. What's interesting is look at 5. 5 is a little bit different. 5 says not F and B. So notice what's going on here. We're saying that it's not the case that F and B together. Remember what we said? We said that this kind of a proposition, a conjunction, is true if and only if both conjuncts are true, and it's false if at least one, possibly both of the conjuncts are false. So this isn't quite like 4, and don't worry if that sounds confusing, if you don't quite get it just yet. Later on, we'll go much further into this because this is a very famous kind of relationship between these 4 and 5, the fact that they look similar but aren't. But what we're saying here is it's not the case that both fire is hot and paper burns, right? So we're denying that thing right there. If some of you guys are mathematicians, you might look at that and it looks like a negative sign. So you might think, oh, distribution property. No, you can't distribute it, right? It's not quite the same thing. But again, I'll explain a lot more further on in the course and it'll make a lot more sense then. Okay, so we've got negations and conjunctions. In the next video, we'll go over disjunctions. So for next time, please read 2.3.4 disjunction and do 2.3.5 exercises.